welcome to class. This is the last day that I'm going to see all of you for about 11 days. So let's talk really quickly about what it's going to look like for the rest of the time, okay? So you guys will have class on Monday and Wednesday next week. Your substitute is Miss Brindley, who is the old community of caring teacher that left last year. So I mentioned that because she knows what she is talking about. She knows how to be a teacher. So don't assume that she's like, oh, she won't know what's going on. I can do whatever I want. In AP, it is really, really important to me that you stay up to task, as in you continue to do what you would do if I was here. That means that I would be bringing headphones. So you will need headphones to watch the two lectures. One is going to finish the current notes and one's going to be on World War I. Bring headphones. How it'll basically work is I'm going to have a few things for you to do. So one, you'll watch a lecture. Two, and we're not going to open it here, but you have an assignment that is due a week from Tuesday. This is a DWP like all the other DWPs that we have done before. If you want to do it while you watch the lecture, you can. If you want to do it after you watch the lecture, you can. It's kind of up to you. Most people will probably have the two of them up. I'm just not going to have it up for you right now because you guys have less time than the other class, and I want to make sure that I get as much lecture in so I don't have to redo it tonight when I record it. But again, you have this over the two sets of notes that you complete and you turn in. This is going to show me that you learn things. Now, you are also going to have 3 starters. Those are based on the 3 lectures. One is based on today's lecture, one is based on the lecture from Monday, and one is based on the lecture on World War I. After the lecture is over is when you'll do the starter. So it's not going to have a date. It's going to be based on relearning and making sure that you understood the answers to the questions and the lecture that you had previously learned. There will be, again, so that's why you don't have a starter today, is mostly because I need to make sure the lecture is recorded. But as soon as you finish the lecture, you complete the starter. If you're gone a day, you do it at home. If you feel like you want to do all of them this weekend and you want to be ahead, you can do that too. The biggest thing is just make sure you watch the lectures, make sure you do the DWP, and then do the starters. The starters are based off your knowledge. It's to see if you're actually understanding this, etc. I will have extra headphones in here, but again, I would bring your headphones if I was you. So we are on our new set of notes, but before we start our new set of notes, I had a couple things I wanted to talk about. We would have talked about it previously with the DBQ, which don't forget that DBQ is finished. If you were not here for the DBQ, I'm putting those lectures online today so that you can be able to make them up. But in between everything going on, we had the Super Bowl. Did anybody watch any part of the Super Bowl? Okay, well, there was a couple of things that happened at the Super Bowl that had to do with our class. We're going to start with the positive, the happier thing that we will talk about in this class. And it has to do with the Super Bowl halftime performance, which a ton of you talked to me about as soon as you watched it. Kudos to you. I did not recognize what happened at first, mostly because I legitimately did not know what Kendrick Lamar was saying 90% of the time. I'm not a big rap person, so honestly, all the words kind of just, I do say Drake. That's as far as I kind of understood, okay? But something interesting happened. Does anybody know what might have to do with this class?
All of his swear words were he wasn't able to say them.
Okay, so the FTC did ban his swear words. That wasn't where I was going, although a good use of the FTC.
He referenced 40 acres and a mule.
He did reference 40 acres and a mule. Did anybody hear him reference 40 acres and a mule? I'm so proud of you for knowing what he was saying. I just wasn't paying attention. So here's what happened. So Kendrick Lamar, if you don't know, there's a song, and the reason it has to do with Drake is there's a long history. But Drake had warned him that if he sang the song, he would sue him and the NFL for $300 million. But in this song, so he was kind of introducing it. And I don't know if you guys saw in the Super Bowl halftime, there was a whole theme about Samuel L. Jackson. He's Uncle Sam. There was a lot of references to Black history as well as oppression. But in the kind of transition, when they were transitioning between the two, he decided that he was going to reference 40 acres and a mule. So this is actually where he said, I'm not going to play the whole halftime show for you. I might link it for you in the future where you can kind of go and see it when they actually said it. But he referenced 40 acres and a mule. Now, my hope is 40 acres and a mule. It's part of our class. But really quick, class, you can collectively say it hopefully together. What person came up with the concept of 40 acres and a mule? Sherman. It's our boy Sherman from the Civil War. So that's our boy Sherman. And by the way, on the left, this was a whole thing about it because, oh my gosh, I forgot to add it in. So I'll have to show it to you some other time. But if we look at Google Trends, they actually showed that there was a massive spike in people Googling 40 acres and a mule. And it's because people didn't know what it was. So just as a super quick reminder, if you forgot, 40 acres and a mule was his idea to take all the land he took in Georgia and the South and redistribute it amongst Black Americans. However, our boy, after Abraham Lincoln left, our next president, Johnson, comes in and immediately vetoes the plan, etc. And so the reason I point this out is just so that you're aware that really when we go to kind of look at history, this is one of the reasons why history becomes important. By the way, I looked up really quick. If you don't know, you can look up for trends. So you can put in searches and see when people search it. So this is the history. Nothing. Oh, look, less than one person per capita did it. All of a sudden, oh, look at that. What day was this? The Super Bowl. And then apparently interest has waned over time. But even if we look at, for example, we'll do the past 12 months. We'll see the interest. Nothing. Look, it's like me Googling for the class. Nothing. Oh, Super Bowl. Okay. So again, this is one of the reasons why you should just be aware. I, first off, was so impressed how many students told me they recognized it. Again, I would have totally loved it if I literally knew anything he was saying during the song. So I needed captions. So once I got captions, I was good to go. But yeah, so 40 acres and a mule. So that's the positive. But now let's talk about the negative. There's a reason, by the way, when we talk about APUSH, states like Oklahoma, Florida, have tried to ban APUSH. And Oklahoma in particular I want to focus on because Oklahoma, when they tried to pass a law that would ban APUSH in the state, they said that APUSH was un-American. And the reason they said it was un-American is because they said it looks at too much of the dark stuff of history. And it looks like the bad stuff. And we should look at the positive because we're America and America is great. And it is a great country. I mention this because something else happened after the Super Bowl and I saw it on social media and it referenced something we had learned right before we started our DBQs. And it has to do with lynching. Now, the Eagles won the Super Bowl, and this is nothing against Eagles fans. So to be very clear, I don't classify all Eagles fans of this. However, when I was scrolling through social media, I saw a post that was this on the left. So this is them. So there's a joke that he sounds like Kermit the Frog. So this is them lynching Kermit the Frog during the Super Bowl parade. And I mentioned this because as a quick reminder, and it was, by the way, it's not just a string tied. It wasn't just we were trying to put it on the pole. It was actual noose. They made a legitimate noose and they hung Patrick Mahomes. And literally the post said, we finally lynched Patrick Mahomes. You have to remember, if you don't know Patrick Mahomes, he's half black. So he's mixed of race. This is what that's referring to. So just be aware when you see something like this. They ended up, I think if I remember correctly, people contacted their job. They came out and they're like, you're trying to get me fired, freedom of speech, all this stuff like that. And they said it was just a joke. Just remember, things are not just jokes, right? They all have serious implications. And this, by the way, is why you should know history. Both for the good, seeing Kendrick Lamar and being like, hey, I connected. And also the bad, recognizing why things like this are problems and why we've talked about before the history of Black America, minorities in America, etc. Okay, but now let's get to a little bit more positive things. We are heading into period 7, so you should have again the notes that say number 21 at the top. I don't want to spoil the connect the dots for you, so I don't want to spoil it for you. You're going to learn about this over the next 2 days. So we are at period 7, so I don't want you to write it too big because we're going to write something else. Maybe do half what I'm about to say on the left side and then make a section on the right for what we're going to do a little bit later. But I want you to add we are now in period 7. Period 7 is both a joy to students and very difficult for students. Why is it a joy? Because it has all the big things that you've learned before in history. It has World War II. It has the Great Depression. It has World War I. All these terms that you've heard of before. The reason why people don't like it, and this is what I want you to put as your date range, it starts in 1898. So again, it starts in 1898. but it does not end until 1945. Now, this doesn't sound like a problem. That's the same range as all the other periods. But that means we have to do imperialism, World War I, Roaring Twenties, Great Depression, New Deal, and World War II all in the same unit. It is too big of a unit, in my opinion. It should be split probably, but they don't. So that means that your test is over some of the biggest events in American history. So period 7, most students consider that their favorite period of American history because, especially World War II, if you don't know statistically, World War II is most students' favorite event in American history. They find it really interesting. But again, we have kind of this huge, broad landscape of everything we're going to learn about. So what are we going to talk about for this specific lecture? Well, we're going to start with imperialism. And when we talk about imperialism, we have to understand what imperialism is. Now, in general, imperialism is taking over other countries, acquiring new countries, and expanding your role in the world. On the top of your paper, so again, I had to do period 7 up there, whatever it could be. I want you to write big at the top. This is the big topic, the big focus. So I want you to write down focus. This is the focus of this entire packet. And I want you to write down America expanding their role in the world. Up until this point, the farthest we have expanded is like Texas, California, continental United States. Really, probably the biggest step is like trying to invade into Canada, which we've talked about before with War of 1812. But realistically, we haven't expanded across our borders. That is going to change during this time period. And part of the reason it changes is imperialism in Europe. So in particular, England, France, Portugal, and Spain become imperialist countries during the late 1800s. If you take an AP World or Euro, you've hopefully learned this before. If not, here's a quick summary. The picture on the left is 1890. So I want you to look at that. That is the continent of Africa. Not a country like my ninth graders say. So 1890, and the next picture is 1900. In the space of 10 years, Africa gets carved up, which you probably did AP Human Geography where they did a whole activity on carving it up. Africa is carved up and given to various countries, and I shouldn't say given to, taken over by various countries in the world. As Europe is doing this, America is seeing this and saying, how can we do the same? Now, when we talk about imperialism, we see imperialism impacts all around the world. Back in 2017, I had the opportunity where a company selected me to go to Germany for 2 weeks and learn all about German culture, learn about German topics. And the reason why they created this program is because German taxpayers felt that when I say the word Germany, what is the first thing that you think of in history when I think of Germany? Okay. Pretzels, things like that. What is realistically the real thing? Nazism and World War II. So the German taxpayers set aside millions of dollars every year to try to reteach American teachers how to teach Germany and to teach other topics, which is funny because a lot of what I teach after that trip has to do with that, but also has to do with something like this. Now, one of the big funders, so it's the German taxpayer, but the second biggest funder of this program is the Deutsche Bank, which if you don't know, Deutsche Bank is the largest bank in Europe. The Deutsche Bank also was the largest funder of Nazism during World War II, but we're just going to push that a little bit to the side. Now, the Deutsche Bank funded us, and so since we went on this trip, you're going to learn in life that you need to schmooze people. So when people give you money, you schmooze them. And so we had to go for 2 hours and sit, and this person who was the VP of the Deutsche Bank had to teach us all the wonderful things that the Deutsche Bank was doing. And we were like, wow, what an amazing company. You're so great. So we could get our money and leave. Okay. So you can see Miss Ray over here on the left-hand side being all studious to try to get the Deutsche Bank on our side. Now, when we were doing this experience, though, this, by the way, is the location. This is the headquarters of Deutsche Bank. The bottom down here is actually one of the largest art museums in Europe. It was really cool. And so that leader person is trying to teach us right here. She's teaching us all this stuff, and at the end, she's like, oh, my goodness, though, I have some great news. Because I have loved meeting you guys, so I'm going to give you a free lunch. And I don't know if you guys know this, but free lunches are like the epitome of life when you are an adult. Liam, you're needed ASAP.
All right.
Okay. You guys can teach him later when he comes back about this story. So what happens is we get a free lunch. However, we declined the free lunch. Not only did we decline the free lunch, we were so uncomfortable with the free lunch that we decided to bail. We didn't even eat, and we were like, let's just go ahead and get to Berlin. This is in Frankfurt, because of what happened. So she takes us to what she called her favorite restaurant in all of Germany. Well, her favorite restaurant is called the Ivory Club, a contemporary colonial cuisine. If you don't know, Germany began to colonize Africa and used it as the testing grounds for the Holocaust. If you don't know, the idea of concentration camps really began in Africa. On a single day, they killed 19,000 Africans in concentration camps all throughout Africa. So this whole restaurant is themed Africa colonialism. And glorifies the taking over of these African nations. So when you go, for example, it has these tusks on the outside, like real life elephants in Africa. And then you go into the thing and it has all the elephants and things like that. All of these, by the way, are original relics that were bought from Northern Africa by the German government in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And then if you notice, it says, teach us to delight in the simple things, aka the simpleness of Africa. Have you guys ever heard the stereotype that like Africa doesn't have like internet, they don't have homes, they don't have cars? So it's the simple things in life. You don't need those things. You have just simple food and things like that. Oh, and I forgot to mention just one little important thing. All of the waiters at this place are black. So you get the real life African experience in this location. Now, why did us teachers leave? Well, we're in cancel culture world, and if I was photographed at this spot, I'm pretty sure I'd go pretty viral. So we left and decided that wasn't the thing. But you have to realize when we talk about colonialism, especially in Germany, we see these trends all throughout all of Germany. Germany actually has an African quarter. So the African quarter was where several Africans, when they began to migrate to Germany, lived. And the African quarter, though, has these names in German. Now, they're referring to countries that Germany had taken over in the continent of Africa. Looking at the name of this street, what location did they take over? What is one country? It's Ghana, exactly. Now, when you go to this African quarter, though, they tried to, so about 20 years ago, they said, look, so Berlin is very segregated almost with areas. So, like, Africans live in the African quarter. Turkish people live in the Turkish quarter. And so they tried to be able to make it, like, not as bad. And so they actually have these, like, things right here that tell you about the African slave trade and taking over of this. But do you notice how it's, like, all vandalized and stuff like that? So this guy in the center, he wanted to kind of fix that. So about 20 years ago, he began a big program to say, we need to accept the horrors of African colonialism and try to be able to come to sense with it in Germany. And so they began this whole thing to, for example, get rid of the street signs that were referring to people who are referring to this colonialism over in Africa, and they succeeded. So now this is the same guy that did our tour. They have changed the names from like Ghana Street to names of famous black Germans, trying to be able to kind of make it more, I wouldn't say acceptable, but realizing and recognizing problems of the past. So, for example, here in Salt Lake, we have Cesar Chavez Drive, which we'll learn about Cesar Chavez, but a massive Latino activist trying to be able to show that we are coming into more modern times. Yeah.
Would I know him?
Would you know Cesar Chavez?
Yes.
Probably the most famous Latin man in American history. So he basically we'll learn about this in April. In the 1960s, World War II. In World War II, we needed a whole bunch of workers. So it's funny to compare it to now because we needed workers because all the men were off to war. So what did we do? We told Mexico we were going to allow all the workers to come in to take over our fields and all of our farms, which is funny because now what do? The opposite. We try to kick them back. But I mention this because this massive group of people were brought in. It rises Latin American migration. So we have this huge Latin population, which if you don't know is expected by the year 2075 to either match or take over the white population in America because it's expanding so much. It's about 35% of America has Latin American origins. And so in the 1960s, though, you could not treat them well. And so a lot of these Latin Americans were working on farms, but back then there was no safety. So every day when you worked on the farms, they would physically spray you with pesticide, and so that you wouldn't have bugs and stuff, and then people started to get sick. And also there was labor unions. So he basically created the farmers' labor unions of America. And his most famous action was they encouraged you to stop eating grapes because the grape companies were being bad to their workers. So they did this huge grape boycott, which caused changes. He also did a hunger strike for 40 days with Robert F. Kennedy, who should have been your president in 68 until he was assassinated. So probably one of the biggest Latin Americans ever. And we have a huge Latin American population, especially towards the west side of. So like when I worked over on the west side, they were like, this is one of the best examples of Latin American culture coming back. But we'll learn about that in April, so precursor to the future. But that does not mean that all of Germany is coming to acceptance of why colonialism might be bad. Now, one thing that is really cool in Germany that I do wish we had here, because I just think it would be really fun, is they have these things known as beer gardens. Now, beer gardens are not just to drink beer. Beer gardens are where if you're in a big city like Berlin, which this is the Berlin Beer Garden, you can't just go out into nature. So instead what you do is you buy a little beer garden plot, you put like a little house on it, and then you have an escape from the city. So these are basically just like little escape from the cities that you can go and hang out, and they're called the beer gardens. Well, this is the beer garden in the African quarter, and as we were walking through the beer garden, we came upon something very interesting because you see you have these cute little houses and cute little places to be able to go. But on one of those houses was this flag. Does anybody know what this flag is? Yeah.
Isn't that the Kaiser's flag or something along those
Yeah,
lines?
so it's the imperialist flag of Germany, aka it's the flag that flew during the imperialist era of Germany, pretty much from 1890 till about 1920-ish. To give you an equivalent, what would we consider this flag in America? The Confederate flag is probably the most similar. Now, in Germany, if you don't know, and in most of Europe, they have hate speech laws. We do not have very many hate speech laws at all in America because we have freedom of speech. So, for example, in Germany, it is illegal to deny the Holocaust. If you publicly deny the Holocaust, if I post on X or whatever that the Holocaust didn't happen, that is a chargeable offense. That is a jail time offense. You can also not legally put on social media or anywhere publicly that the Nazi Party did the right thing. In Poland, you can't say that Poland was any part of the Holocaust. It's actually against the law in Poland. So this flag is against the law. So like in America, if you fly a Confederate flag, you can do that. My neighbor does it. But in this flag, it is against the rules. So it is $5,000 per day if you fly this flag. So we're hanging out in the African quarter. Now, by the way, this is the guy that has that flag, and he was there, and he's like, you want to see my flag? I'll show you my flag. And he showed it very proudly, so I took a picture of his flag. But he receives a $5,000 per fine day, and they come in. They have put him in jail before for flying the flag, and he keeps doing it. And remember, this is in the African quarter, so imagine going to like the blackest part of the South and flying the Confederate flag. That is the equivalent of what's happening here. And we asked him, we said, why do you do this? And he said, this is the true America. When the true German, when the whites of Germany took over, insert racial slur here, of Africa, that was the true Germany, and we should go back to that. There's a reason why, so when we talk about this imperialism, of this feeling of taking over countries, and we're going to talk about countries in America that during this time we acquired and we still own. There are some, like the Philippines, that we gave them their freedom, but we're going to talk about how during that experience of getting freedom, we imperialized them super heavy as well. And the goods and the bads of those different things. Imperialism, by the way, is not just taking over countries. It can also be intellectual or emotional imperialism. So, for example, this is the Romanian gymnastics team. Now, I'm a big gymnastics fan. I have season passes at Utah Gymnastics. I love watching gymnastics. Romania used to be amazing. Like, they were at the top, always getting golds. Until last year, the Romanians did not have a team in the Olympics for 20 years. And the problem was that they started to all of a sudden not work as much or whatever. At least that's what the coaches said. And finally, like in 2008, somebody asked the coach, why are the Romanians so bad at gymnastics now? And he responded and he said, it's because of those darn Americans. Here's the reason why. In America, if you practice gymnastics, you have a choice typically if you do those gymnastics. In countries like Romania, Russia, China, areas where the government had a lot more control and had communism in particular, you can be forced to do that, and you don't have a choice. In China, at 4 years old and 3 years old, They select you to go into their programs, and you go to a special school where all you do is gymnastics, which is why those programs are so good. So Romania used to do that, and then when the Berlin Wall fell and the Iron Curtain collapsed and communism falls in Europe, Romania starts to see other people. They see Americans have more choice. They begin having more choice and refusing to go to practice, and Romania's stuff plummeted. So we can also have intellectual imperialism as well. Now, a few years ago, when I went to Germany, we had the option to ask one question to a bunch of German kids. And so we decided to ask, when you think of America, what do you think of? Here are all the things that they said. So take a second and go ahead and read. This is what they think of America. All right. So, first off, one section, which is this. So this was an English class. So if you don't know, German schools, you're required to learn English in most cases. So they were actually learning English when we were there. But you'll notice that they said things like, for example, cities. So we asked them, what do you mean? They said every single person lives in these cities that have tall skyscrapers everywhere. And you all live in skyscrapers. Is that true about everybody in America? No. Okay. Next, American football and cheerleaders. So we asked them what they meant. They said, well, every single boy plays football and every girl is a cheerleader. And all the girls wear their cheerleader outfits every single day to school. Is that true about America? No. Okay. Now, notice, for example, fast food. If you don't know in Germany, Germany's quick meal of the day is actually dinner. Lunch is the longest meal of the day. So most schools actually have a 2-hour break in the middle of school, but also at work. So you go home with your family, you eat food, and then you go back. So the concept of fast food is very anti-German because meals are not supposed to be fast. They're supposed to be savored with people around you. Does fast food describe America very well?
Yes.
I would say probably so. Okay. Now, high school. So when we look at all these things like football, cheerleader, high school is when a lot of students in gymnasium, which is like their highest level of schooling in Germany, they will come over to America to do their study abroad. But think about it. If you think of most American, your age-ish kind of movies, where do the vast majority of the scenes take place? High school, in schools. So they see all these things. Now, I want to point out one thing because they also said on here, prom. My family has hosted foreign exchange students before, and usually when they say, what are the things they're most looking forward to? They say, I'm looking forward to football games, I'm looking forward to prom, and they say, I'm looking forward to Halloween. Why? Because Halloween's a very American thing. It's like probably the most American, unique holiday compared to the two. But I want you to think of every American high school movie. What usually takes place? There's usually a football game, and there's usually prom, which doesn't make sense because those two don't take place at the same time. Yet they're always in the same movies, right? Or prom queen or whatever it could be. So again, we have some of these as well. So again, we talk about New York. They mentioned Hollywood and famous actors. We said, what do you mean by that? And they said, well, in America, there's so many famous people that you just walk out the door and you see a famous person, like every single day, and your best friends are famous people. Is that true in America? No, but they perceive that because the vast majority of celebrities in the world live in LA, live in Hollywood, okay? Now going over here is bacon. Now we asked them what they meant by that, and they said, well, Americans, they love bacon so much that they actually eat bacon for every meal, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And they're like, I even heard that kids will put them like in a Ziploc baggie and put them in their backpacks, and they'll snack on bacon throughout the day of school as like a nourishment for them. Is that true? Do you guys eat bacon for every single meal that you eat at? No. Now, the one that we probably would have seen today if I had gone back and done this is probably ranch. If you don't know, ranch is very American. And a few years ago, a girl went viral because she purchased ranch, and she loved it so much. And now foreign stores, like think about how we have like the Mexican aisle, right? And then we have like the Asian food aisle. A lot of stores have an American food aisle. I don't know if you guys have seen what they have. It's usually marshmallow fluff, which is used like in Rice Krispie treats. There's Pop-Tarts, sugary cereal, and then usually they have some sort of other foods in there as well. But again, when they picture foods that are unique to America, they're like bacon and ranch and peanut butter and jelly. That's another big one. Because peanut butter and jelly is so odd and strange to other people in the world. Now, there's a really, really easy way to see when I went, and that's because Trump is on here. I went to July of 2017, so that was right after Trump's election. That's what, like, all the kids wanted to talk about. But we're not talking about that right now, but just kind of point that out. Marks are different. It just has to do with school systems are different, so I'm not going to worry about that. But I do want to point out the one at the bottom is guns, okay? Now, when we had the opportunity to ask them what they wanted to ask us, that's all they wanted to talk about. Because they said we got to talk about guns. So I said, okay, what do you want to know? And they said, well, we heard that you guys love guns so much. Every person is required by law to own 4 guns. And they have 2 on their hips, and they have 2 on their ankles, and you walk around like the gunslingers in all the Western movies, and they're like, everybody owns a gun, and you just like pull it out whenever you feel like it. Is that true about most Americans?
No.
Okay, probably not.
I did not like know that
I did not specifically ask them about Switzerland, but I can tell you something about Germany. If you don't know, in Germany, guns are banned except for hunting weapons. The hunting weapons, if you don't know, have to be you have to hunt on government leased land, basically, so government approved land, and you have to keep all of your guns there. They have a safe, and you have to lock them at the spot, and you have to have a guide take you to make sure that you don't use your guns inappropriately. So the idea of guns, they were very fascinated with, and I was pretty much the only person from a Republican state, and so they were all explaining their laws and stuff like that, and I was like, well, in Utah, we do have a lot of guns in Utah. I mean, I own 9 guns at my house, and they found that fascinating. Oh my goodness, they wanted to know everything about that. And I think all the other teachers from California were horrified when I said I have 9 guns. I'm like, guys, I'm a hunter, and like I go where there's bears and stuff, and I don't want to die. So again, it's just a little bit different. But again, thinking about all this, where do you think they got their opinions on America from? Movies, social media, TV. Again, they didn't sit down and read a book about American culture. They saw it based on what they had seen on TV, which is why when people think of Africa, like my 9th graders do, of the country of Africa that they tell me so clearly about, they're like, well, I've seen Lion King. I know what Africa looks like. Is all of Africa the Lion King? No. And so that's one of the things of realizing imperialism sometimes can be in our mind from things like media.
Did no one talk about like obesity in America?
They just brought up fast food, but it's because, well, I'll tell you that in a second. They did not bring up obesity, but next time I go to Germany and I'm in a school, I'll say, hey, what do you think about obesity? And then we'll have a conversation. Okay. So speaking of fast food, though, so kind of segueing it, we can also have fast food imperialism as well. Now, if you don't know, in the world, the largest food chains in the world are American food chains. Does anybody know what the #1 food chain is in the world?
Subway.
Subway. Subway is the #1 biggest food chain in the world. It has about 60,000 more stores than McDonald's, which is #2, and #3 is Starbucks. Now, when we look at these different countries and fast food around the world, you know that, like, although it might change slightly, like a Big Mac is around the world. It's actually a thing called the Big Mac Index that determines the worth of money based on how much you're paying for a Big Mac. If you're paying basically very small compared to the US dollar, you're in a more impoverished area compared to rich areas where you will pay more than an American Big Mac. Now, when we talk about moving these around the world, these different fast food places are in every continent around the world, spreading it all over the place. Even in Afghanistan, in Iraq. Because American military had gone after 9/11 to these areas, they decided to open Subways. There's also a KFC. So I don't know if you guys can see, there's a Subway right there. This is McDonald's. There's also KFCs, for example, over there as well. But spreading this around the world. And when people heard about this, of like America going in, because there's a big argument about whether America should or should not go into other countries, and are we imperializing, like possibly right now, going into other countries, like that's one of President Trump's arguments about Ukraine. It is not our responsibility to go into other countries and manage them or influence them, which is why after this happened, somebody decided to make a little political cartoon of their own, and they decided to make this image. Now, if you don't know, this is the image on the left, so that's the McDonald's. On the right, does anybody know where this image is or what this image is called? One of the most famous images, if you've been to DC, you've seen the statue. It's called the raising of the flag at Iwo Jima. Iwo Jima was the last major battle before we dropped the atomic bombs on Japan. And this is one of the most historic American-y type of feelings. And people are saying it's just America continue to imperialize again and again with fast food places. Now, in Berlin, there is also an area known as the Turkish Quarter. Anybody have any guesses on where the majority of the people are from in the Turkish Quarter? Turkey. Now, if you don't know, Germany has very lax immigration laws. You can actually become a citizen in 24 hours in Germany. Now, one of the reasons for this, though, has to do with the Holocaust. They're trying to kind of penance themselves. So they allow a lot more immigrants in. This is also one of the reasons why the AfD, which if you don't know is the modern Nazi party in Germany, has now risen because of the fear of immigrants. So in this area, though, they are very Turkish, and they do not like outsiders. They don't want imperialism coming in, and they want to be an individual. So you see, for example, they have in the middle of Berlin, like these farms and stuff like that, trying to keep this Turkish thing. Now, again, one of the things about this, though, is when we went, we were told in the Turkish Quarter, don't look like a tourist because everybody will hate you. So, of course, this is what we look like, which I'm pretty sure is the epitome of a tourist. And while we were there, something kind of interesting happened with this girl that was right here. She was pregnant. And while we were over there, this guy kind of stumbled into our group and shoved her to the ground and said, that's what you get for being an American in the Turkish Quarter. You don't do this kind of stuff in the Turkish Quarter. They don't want foreigners in the Turkish Quarter, which is why when Subway decided to go and Starbucks decided to put a Starbucks into the Turkish Quarter, mysteriously during construction, there was like little fires that would pop up, and then there was like some vandalism, and then eventually somebody set a bomb off in the Starbucks and said, don't bring Starbucks to the Turkish Quarter. They ended up moving it 2 blocks away because it was like at the edge of the Turkish Quarter. They moved it 2 blocks away, and it's been fine ever since. But again, people don't want foreign influence. The arguments for and against imperialism and the role in the world. In this case, this is a American coming in and making other countries more American. Should we or should we not go into other places and make them more and more American? Or is by doing that, oh, I don't have the other one on here. Sorry. I also do this exact lesson with Syria, so I thought about the Syrian one I have. But again, should we make other countries more American? America is the great democratic capital of the world. We're an awesome country. If you know anything about the foreign nations hockey thing that's been going on the last couple of days and the big, we are America, you're Canada, we don't like you, they don't like us. Is it our job to go into other countries and make them the best country in the world like America is? Or should we reduce our role in the world? And spoiler alert, during this time period, we expand our role in the world. And it starts with Japan. Now, when we go into Japan, and on your notes for me, here's what I need you to do. You're going to go ahead and highlight and star opening of Japan. And we're going to pretend that this is almost like an essay. If you will go to where it says Alaska and draw a really significant line above Alaska. And next to or above this line, I want you to put that everything above this line, and actually, will you do me a favor and keep that line and make it go all the way across the page? So make it go all the way across the page. And this line you can put down, everything above this line is historical context. Most essays, even though 1898 is where we technically start, most imperialism essays begin in 65 after the Civil War because of Alaska. But we're going to start over in Japan. Now, I'm going to be showing you in these images the Japanese version of the events and the American version of these events. And I want you to notice while we're going through this, the differences between the two. You're going to notice the Japanese have a much more negative, scary opinion, while America, well, I think what we know about America and how we're going to probably portray the same exact event. Now, what happens in this event is we have this Commodore, so leader of the Navy, named Matthew Perry. If you will highlight and star Commodore Matthew Perry. Commodore Matthew Perry, in 1854, which again is why it's context because it happens before the Civil War, he is commanded to open, if you will highlight, open the ports of Japan to trade. And I want you to circle and star the word trade. Now what happens is Commodore Perry brings these massive Navy ships into Tokyo. To understand why this is such a big deal, we have to understand Japan. You have to realize that prior to this, and I want you at the end to see where it says trade, do a little arrow, and I want you to put next to that arrow think about Japan before Perry comes. So I want you to write down, think about Japan before Perry comes. Japan was an isolationist state, very isolationist. The only people who left were sometimes traders, but they were pretty self-sustainable as a country. Very rarely did they allow people to land, and the only people they allowed to land were whalers, and the whalers provided them with oil. Japan was completely on their own. They did not interact with other countries until this event happens. Now, you have to realize that in Japan, we have a class system. It's called Japanese feudalism. And this is how it works. At the very top is the emperor. Now, most people think that the emperor is in charge. The emperor is not in charge because in Japan, the emperor is a god. He is also displayed as a sun. That's why in World War II, when they have the rising sun flag, there's a sun in the middle. The sun in the middle is the emperor. The emperor is a godlike figure. You do not talk to the emperor. You do not interact with the emperor. In fact, the only known time, the first time the emperor ever spoke to the people of Japan was at the end of World War II when he announced that Japan was surrendering. And that was huge because that is God telling you, and it basically destroyed the emperor's image because you don't talk to the emperor. Instead, the people that you care about the most are the next level down, which are the wealthy landowners. This is almost identical to European feudalism. Now, the people in the middle are the shoguns, and we care about the shoguns a lot in this story. The shoguns, I think it's 11 splits, so Japan is split into 11 areas, with the shogun, the really wealthy landowner, at the top. From there, you kind of go down. You have the samurai, who are the protectors. You have the peasant class and the merchants, and all of them basically report back to the shogun. So let's get back to Matthew Perry arriving. Matthew Perry arrives in these big black ships. And in particular, and by the way, you might want to, next to Opening of Japan of the West, or next to number 1, you can write down the words black ships. If you ever see an image like this with a big, scary black ship, that's going to be Commodore Perry. Now, the reason it's black ship is because it's coal, right? These are coal, they're powered by coal, so it's all the coal dust falling down onto the ship. But you have these big black ships that arrive into Japan. So if you're noticing here, these are all of them coming into Japan. Now, this is out of absolutely nowhere where this massive fleet of black ships is coming into the country. Now, when we go to look at the kind of American version of the story, you see that they came on board and they taught and said, hey, we should open up Japan and everything is great and everything is wonderful. Or look how pretty this is, right? So they're coming over here, they march over there, and they are welcomed by Japan and opening it up to trade. Do you guys see that that's what actually happens? No, because we're America. And what they're going to notice is America uses a significant amount of force. So when he comes into play here, he's going to do a show of force. Now, really quickly, in number 1, if you will put underneath the number 1, HC, and highlight the First Industrial Revolution. Matthew Perry comes because after the First Industrial Revolution, we now have if you will highlight, massive surge in American commerce. You could also highlight the market revolution. And then at the end, you can highlight, and this is the big one, highlight and star foreign markets. You're going to notice a trend here. Foreign markets is what we want. So when they come to open this up, they basically say, you don't have much of a choice. When they first arrive, the shoguns they greet the shoguns, and the shoguns pretty much say, no, we're not going to do this. Japan is on its own. So what does Matthew Perry do? Matthew Perry goes back to his ship and begins to fire cannonballs at the coast of Japan. Now, he fires them so they won't actually hit Japan. He is just shooting them just far enough to land on shore. What is he trying to do by shooting these cannons at Japan but not actually hitting Japan? What is he trying to do? Scare him. It's a show of force. I would write in the margins of this, show of force. If you don't do what we say, we will fight you, and it will be dangerous, and it will be hard. Now, Matthew Perry leaves, and this is where it gets to be the downfall of Japan. When he leaves, the shoguns do not know what to do. So instead what they do is they go to the samurais, and they say, what do you guys think we should do to stop this fight? So I want you to imagine how big of a deal it is. Imagine President Trump, because I'm sure this is totally his personality. President Trump shows up outside of our door. He comes in and says, hey guys, I'm thinking about taking Canada as our 51st state. What do you guys think we should do? And he comes in and he says, you guys have the free reign. Whatever you say, we will do. Do you think the President of the United States is probably going to do that?
No.
Probably not, right? So imagine your highest person who is just down from a god says, I don't know what to do. What should we do? And this is when Japan begins to massively fall in this area. Now, when Matthew Perry leaves for this next time, he begins to come back over and over and over again. He does it show force. And the shoguns are once again going to the samurai saying, I don't know what to do. Tell me what to do. Now, when we talk about Matthew Perry coming back, though, this references something very interesting. If you notice at the bottom, this is Matthew Perry coming over into the Japanese. It says, the U.S.-Japan fleet, Captain Perry, carrying the, quote, gospel of God into the heathen lands. We have learned this phrase, gospel of God, before. What phrase in APUSH is it referencing when he's going to use the gospel of God into the heathen lands? What is that called? Manifest destiny. We are just continuing manifest destiny abroad past our borders. And that's when he comes into this. Now, Japan begins to panic. Again, the shoguns do not know what to do. By the way, this show of force is very similar to a few years ago when North Korea wanted to show force against Japan. It began shooting rockets to fly over Tokyo and land in Tokyo Bay. That was a show of force. These were nuclear weapons that were denuclearized to show we can do whatever we want. So eventually the shoguns, they go to the samurai, they say, what should we do? And the samurai begin to rebel. The samurai overthrow the shoguns, and it begins a massive revolution in Japan. This revolution, by the way, is known as, I'll put it up there in a second, but it begins what is known as the Meiji Revolution or the Meiji Restoration. If you will put down at the bottom where it says Treaty of Kanagawa at the very end of America, write down this word. This is one of the reasons, by the way, why Japan begins to mass industrialize. They realize we are way behind in the world. We cannot live in this deindustrialized solo place. Their mass industrialization directly eventually leads into World War II. But eventually Matthew Perry gets what he wants. And it's called the, if you will highlight and star, the Treaty of Kanagawa. And the Treaty of Kanagawa, if you will highlight, opened the ports of Japan. And this is really when America realizes we can go into other countries and get what we want. Now, in the bullet above where it says gunboat diplomacy, I want you to highlight and triple star gunboat diplomacy. Triple star. Because it's really important for today's world. Now, as a quick reminder, let's see if you remember from the lecture, Matthew Perry wanted to show Japan that at any time we could go and conquer them. So what did he begin to do to influence Japan to open their ports? Who remembers?
Cannonballs.
They shot cannonballs over into Europe. Or, that would be impressive. Into Japan. Now, this is where you use, if you will highlight, using naval power. Navy is the big thing at this time. To show, if you will highlight, direct threat of warfare. If they do not, if you will highlight, not complying with orders or requests. So, for example, here in the United States right now, we're being a little imperialist right now. If you don't know, our current list of countries that we would like to acquire from President Trump's presidency is Canada, Greenland, Panama, and the Gaza Strip over in Palestine. Now, with these combined, a show of force would be, if you do not comply, we more than likely do some sort of a show of force. And if you, again, do not comply, we will use warfare. One of the best examples of this is air shows. I love air shows. Because my son wants to be a pilot now. I love seeing the planes fly. I just think it's really cool. And we have full air space right now. If you don't know, although air shows are really popular in America, they're also popular abroad. And our Lightning demo team, our F-35 Lightning demo team up at Hill Air Force Base, is just about to leave to go abroad to do an air show abroad. Why would America spend millions or billions of dollars every year to fly our planes to other countries and do cool demos where, like, we do practice shooting and we show how cool our planes are? Why would we spend bajillions of dollars doing that? Yeah.
Because of this, to like threaten other people, show them that we're powerful.
Yeah, so if we do our little cute show in France, if France wants to bully us, what could we possibly do? Bring our planes and we will show them exactly what happens. It is a show of force. Also the number one recruiting tool for both the Air Force and the Navy. The biggest thing is that we are going to show other people. That shows our force. So what do we care about for HC? Here's what I need you to do. Next to opening of Japan, you're going to put down HC1. This is our first example of contest. Remember, every single paper at this point should be preparing for an essay. So our first example is this, but I'm going to tell you some more examples. So I need you to find some space. There might be some space on the right or in the margins on the right. I'm going to write down a couple more examples. So HC2, you can go ahead and write down HC2. The second big context that I want you to write down I would write down industrial revolutions. So in this case, why did we want Japan? We wanted markets for our goods because of the first industrial revolution and the market revolution. Anytime, so second industrial revolution, we want more markets. Second industrial revolution, we go to China. We want places to sell our stuff. Okay, HC number 3, if you will put down HC number 3. We talked about this term before. Matthew Perry not only felt like it was his job to go over and open the ports, he felt it was his God-given duty. What is that called? Manifest destiny. So the next one is manifest destiny. But this time we're going to manifest destiny into other countries, not just our continental U.S. And finally, what are we on, HC4? HC4 is Europe's imperialism. I'll give you a hint. When other countries do better than us, what does America usually try to do?
Be better.
Be better than them in some way. So, for example, in second period, I was talking about this Four Nations face-off, which is a big hockey tournament that they just did for the first time. And there were some kids who were like, in my opinion, they should change the rules that if we lose in the championship, they should let us get a redo because obviously it wasn't our fault that we lost. So we should get a redo, right? Because it's not fair that we lost, so we should always win, and we should always win, and we should always win. And it's kind of like people talk all the time that you never feel more American until it's like the Olympics because you really want us to beat everybody else. So that's kind of the case here. If Europe's doing it, if England's doing it, if France is doing it, if Spain's doing it, if Portugal's doing it, why can't we do it too? So we take their model and we move abroad. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go through the, something are good? Okay. We're going to go through the most popular imperialism because for the next 15 years, we do massive worldwide expansion. And remember, what is our role in the world? In this case, I want you to think in your head, why did America try to expand our role in the world in this case? You can raise your hand and tell me, why did we try to expand our world in America by going to Japan? What were we trying to do? Why did we want to go to Japan? We wanted to increase our trade, right? We wanted to go into other countries and make more money. We're increasing our role by showing the world that we can do this. Our first major one, if you will go over to Alaska and put a big number 1 and circle the number 1. We're going to label each of the major imperialist efforts that America decided to do. So a big number 1 is Alaska. Now, Alaska is our, if you will put next to this, so Alaska next to this, I want you to write down first non-continental, continental means inside the borders of the United States, first non-continental acquisition. So this is where we acquire, get land outside of the continental United States. Now, here's the problem, though, with Alaska. Now, we acquire Alaska, and this guy named William Seward, which is like Seward, Alaska, is going to acquire this. He is the Secretary of State at this time in the United States. The problem is with Seward, if you will highlight his name, William Seward, people thought that acquiring Alaska was an idiotic thing to do, right? If you don't know, in Alaska, only about 20 to 30% of Alaska is actually livable land. Most of the land is very cold, it's very hard, it's in the mountains. What is there in Alaska? Like, there's nothing really important in Alaska. In fact, it was so bad that people began to make fun of him for it. Because the only really thing that was being acquired at this point is lumber. And they're like, we could get lumber from other places. And people saw Alaska as a complete waste of money. In fact, they saw it as a giant sheet of ice. Why do we need this giant sheet of ice? We don't need this thing. Now, we acquire it for $7.2 million, which in today's money is $122 million. That is a good chunk of money. However, with the amount of land that we acquired, it was only 2 cents an acre. It was actually cheaper than the Louisiana Purchase to acquire this land. And if you're wondering how much land did we acquire, that's how big Alaska is. comparative to the other states. It is a huge state acquired for a big cost, but very cheap land. But people didn't care and they wanted to make fun of him. So they called it two things. If you will highlight and star both the words Seward's Folly and Seward's Icebox. This is a great one that you could do outside evidence for, like on a DBQ, where they're talking about, like, you get these pictures and you know it's Alaska, but you're like, oh, let me tell you about this. So people saw this as the stupidest idea. They called it Seward's Folly, as in Seward's Mistake, or Seward's Icebox, because they said that he spent $122 million on something that was a complete waste of money. Now, the big benefit, though, was manifest destiny. If you'll highlight in the next one the word manifest destiny. One thing that people did agree with, though, is our manifest destiny. It is our God-given right to expand west. But in this case, I want you to draw a little arrow from manifest destiny. And I want you to write down, now is our God-given right to, if you'll write down, expand outside U.S. borders. So now we're not just expanding all the way to the west coast, we're expanding outside of our ocean borders. Now, unfortunately for William Seward, this was a disaster for him. He lost the Secretary of State position. People made fun of him for a pretty significant amount of time for acquiring this until the 1950s. Why? Because two really important things were found in the 1950s in Alaska. One was minerals, but there's one mineral that Alaska is very famous for. What mineral is that? Oil is not a mineral.
Salt.
Gold. Okay, that's okay. That's what science teachers are for. Okay, so they find gold, and gold is very important to America. But more importantly, what did they find? Oil, and that is what Alaska is known for. Alaska has some of the largest oil fields in the United States. We don't have that many of them. And these two things combined makes Alaska so beneficial that it becomes a state in the United States in the 1950s in order to be able to get more and more land. But this did, if you will highlight in the second bullet, it was from Russia. So Russia cedes it to us for the purchase agreement. And it does, if you'll highlight in the next bullet, massively expanded United States territory. Now, our second big one, so if you will do a big number 2, and again, each time you number, I would circle it, make sure you know, if you were to write an essay on imperialism, the major parts of imperialism. In this case, we have a book. And you need to know, and if you have two different colors, personally, I would highlight in two colors, just to make sure you need to know both names. You need to know Alfred Thayer Mahan, and you need to know the book, The Influence of Sea Power Upon History. Because again, you need to know both the book and the author of the book. Now, Alfred Thayer Mahan is a historian, and he is a Navy historian. He writes a book about the world's sea powers. And in particular, he analyzed, if you will highlight in the first bullet, success of the British Army. And what he figured out is that if you will highlight Britain's control of the seas with, if you will highlight, a decline in naval strength among European competitors, directly led to, and you're going to highlight and star, Britain's emergence as the world's dominant military, political, and economic power. He argues that the Navy itself is the reason why England is such a massive global power. So he argues that if we want to do that, we need to copy the European model. Norton, do you have a question?
Would this be number 2?
Yes. This combined is number 2, but I didn't already tell you that. This is number 2, biggest examples of America expanding the role of power. So he's going to say that if you will star the next bullet, and he uses this as a justification, and military leaders use this in his recommendations to see if they can make changes in America. Down where it says 3 goals, I want you to bracket 1, 2, and 3 and star those 3. These are the 3 major goals of this imperialism. And I want you to think, did we or did we not achieve this? Number 1, highlight naval bases in the Caribbean. We argued that we must protect American trade and add Navy bases in the Caribbean. Class, yes or no? Do we have Navy bases in the Caribbean? Yes, probably one of our largest, most famous bases is Guantanamo Bay. Guantanamo Bay is on leased land in Cuba, which I still find very funny that's in Cuba because Cuba does not like us. However, I point this out because Cuba, as of a year ago, only had 18 people left. However, President Trump is reviving Cuba, and it's now going to be allegedly the home of all deported undocumented migrants. So they are preparing. He did issue an executive order last week to prepare Guantanamo Bay for 30,000 migrants to be put in Guantanamo Bay. So we will see what happens. But we do have Navy bases, a lot of them in the Caribbean. Next, if you will highlight, construct a canal in Central America. Because if we can create a canal, we don't have to go down the tip of South America. We can trade more. Class, is there a canal in South America that we use?
Yes.
What's it called? The Panama Canal. If you were right down next to the West Coast, Panama Canal. Which hint is on the back page, and we will learn about it in your next lecture while I am at Magic Kingdom. Next, if you will, and by the way, that's why President Trump wants Panama, so we can control the trade. Okay, and next, highlight, acquire islands throughout the Pacific. Class, do we own islands in the Pacific Ocean?
Yes.
Yes, what is one example? Hawaii, you can write down Hawaii. Anybody know another example? American Samoa, Guam, Philippines, which we don't own anymore. Yes, we do acquire them. So class, did we achieve Alfred Thayer Mahan's vision? Very much so. Now today, it's not about the Navy. We actually thought going into World War II was going to be a naval war. It was an air war. So today we typically judge militaries by their air dominance versus their Navy dominance. America, if you do not know, has the largest both Navy and Air Force in the world. If we compare air forces, the second largest air force in the world has 3% of what we have. We have expanded it to become the largest in the world based on this book. We just converted from the Navy, which again, that's why Pearl Harbor happened. We thought it would be a naval battle. It was not a naval battle in World War II. Japan had planes, we just didn't know it yet. But we'll talk about that in 3 weeks. Okay, and our last couple of topics here, the next one is the Turner thesis. If you will put down a number or number 3, but this one's a little bit tricky. I want you to write down underneath this context with a question mark. So this could either be context or it could be an expansion. So here's what the Turner thesis. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I forgot this. I forgot that this was in here. This is one of my favorite things to talk about. If you will put at the end of Alfred Thayer Mahan's Influence of Sea Power upon History, write down the words Great White Fleet. And I would star this. It's a fantastic outside evidence. One way that we showed our massive naval power is by expanding what we call the Great White Fleet. Now today, what color are our Navy ships? Does anybody know? They're like a grayish blue. It's actually a patented color, so only the American military can use it in the United States. Why do we color it that way? So it blends into the ocean. If we painted our ships white, will it blend into the ocean? No, and it doesn't. And instead what it does is it makes them stand out. So we repainted all of our ships white. Why would we do that? Why are we going to repaint our ships white and sail them around the ocean?
So they are noticeable.
So they're noticeable. What is a term we have learned today that it's very similar to? Gunboat diplomacy. If you'll put next to this, it's gunboat diplomacy. We are continuing our massive show of force. In fact, we were so proud of our big white ships that we actually made them go on a world tour, and we sailed our big white ships all around the world to all the major powers all across the world, and we would sail right past them in our big white ships. We were proving to the world how big and how great our fleet was. Yeah.
They went all the way around the world?
Yep, that's their route.
That's cool.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is what we did today with our airplanes. We just do it with airplanes instead of ships. Okay? Although, in Hawaii every year, I don't know if you guys know this, they actually have war games where for a month and a half, they play games in Hawaii, pretend battling each other, and America participates because we want to show everybody how good we are.
Wasn't that what that one movie about like aliens was based off of? That was set in Hawaii?
I did not know there was a movie set in Hawaii with aliens. I do not know. Research it and let me know.
Okay.
Okay? So, for example, if you notice in this, we got this nice big one. This is our boy Teddy Roosevelt that we'll talk about later. But notice, again, we're bringing our Great White Fleet, but notice the bottom. It says the word peace. because we're going to show the world our great big military, because if you bother us, we're going to use our military, but if not, we're going to have peace. Isn't that nice? We won't hurt you if you do exactly what you say. That's a big moniker for the next little bit. Okay, by the way, in the next 15 years, the U.S. Navy becomes the third largest naval power in the world. Today, it is the #1 naval power in the world. Okay, so really quick, we're going to do Turner thesis. So with our Turner thesis, we talked about before the World's Fair that happened in 1893. At this World's Fair, there was one major guy, and this was Turner. Turner argued the following: the frontier has gone, and with its going has closed the first period of American history. If you will highlight in this, declared, so highlight the word declared, and highlight the western frontier is now, if you will highlight, officially closed. Now, this basically says there is no more room to expand west. People were so overcome by this speech that they collapsed on the ground and passed out that we couldn't acquire more land in the west. There's no more west, and literally people couldn't handle it. But he said, but there's some good news, because although we've ran out of land in the west, where can we now go? Okay, if we go, all right, that's okay. All right, so looking at this map, if we expanded west and we're going west and we hit a border, are we going to go back this way? Or what way could we go, class?
South.
More west. Okay.
North.
Okay, this is just being recorded for all of B-Day. You guys are doing great. If you will double star the next bullet and highlight, frontier must now expand beyond the American borders.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah. Do we end at 53 or 54? It's 54, isn't it?
54 today.
Okay. So the frontier now must expand beyond borders. If you will highlight continuing manifest destiny, and I want you to write down next to manifest destiny, justification. This is justifying our expansion continuing westward. Real quick, since I have one more minute. What's our next number? Are we on 4?
Yeah.
Put 4 next to social Darwinism. Now put underneath social Darwinism, I want you to write again, or underneath the 4, the word context. So this could either be a cause or a context. Now we've learned social Darwinism in the past, right? Racial justification. I want you to put next to social Darwinism, justifying expansion based on science. So when we go to the Philippines, we argue these poor Filipinos, they can't help themselves, so we must help them instead. Or these poor Hawaiians, they don't know what to do with all their land, so we must take it instead. Next class, you're going to start the Spanish-American War, one of the most important events of this time period with imperialism. Have a good day. We got to where I wanted to, so I'm happy. That last part was rough, guys.
Thank you.